The history of music is filled with records that went pretty much unnoticed when they were originally released, but were later rediscovered and regarded as groundbreaking albums that never got the credit they deserved. This album, called Cauldron, which was recorded in 1967 and released in 1968, is one of those records. 50 Foot Hose hailed from San Francisco, but the group never achieved the recognition of other Bay Area bands such as Jefferson Airplane or the Grateful Dead. However, the group's combination of psychedelia with avant-garde compositional ideas and electronic instruments was highly innovative and groundbreaking. In this video, we're going to take a look at the history of the group, and the history of this psychedelic and avant-garde gem called Cauldron. Let's begin. 50 Foot Hose were formed in 1967 by Cork Marquesky. Marquesky got his start in music playing in rhythm and blues bands such as the Ethics. The band achieved moderate success in clubs from the Bay Area, and released a single in the mid-60s called Scopple. By 1967, however, Marquesky's love for avant-garde composers was becoming more evident, and the band got increasingly more experimental. As a result, 1967 saw the group releasing a wildly experimental song called Bad Trip, with the intention that the record could be played at any speed. The group broke up shortly after the release of the single, but a few months later, Marquesky met future 50 Foot Hose member Dave Blossom. In an interview several decades later, Marquesky recalled, "I met David Blossom on a casual gig, and we started to talk about music and what it could be. I had been in art school for 4 years, and I was well aware of avant-garde music. I had owned Poème Electronique since 1962, this was my introduction. So we got together the next day, talked, and listened to records. I played Bad Trip for him, and we also listened to electronic music, free jazz, and feedback guitar solos. We decided to put a band together with the idea that rock and roll was electronic music, it just didn't know it yet." David Blossom's wife Nancy Blossom was recruited as the lead singer along with Larry Evan on guitar and Jerome Kimsey on drums. Marquesky was in charge of providing the electronic sounds. At this point, Marquesky was fully immersed in the ideas of experimental composers such as John Cage and Terry Riley, and he decided to construct his own custom-made electronic instrument. This instrument was built from a combination of elements like theremins, fuzz boxes, a cardboard tube, and a speaker from a World War II bomber. The group started playing clubs around the Bay Area, and Mercury Records soon showed interest in the band after listening to a demo tape. After a meeting with the label, the group got signed to Limelight, a subsidiary of Mercury Records. In October 1967, 50 Foot Hose entered the studio and started recording the album. The album was recorded at Trident Studios in North Beach, and Sierra Sound Studios in Berkeley. Dan Healy, who often worked with the Grateful Dead, was hired as the engineer and producer of the record. Marquesky recalled, "We were very lucky to have Dan Healy as an engineer and producer. We provided him with challenges that he found fun and interesting. So when we got to Trident Studios for sweetening and mix down, we felt like we could try anything we wanted, and Dan felt free to toss in his ideas as well. We never fought or argued. The music had a life of its own, and we got out of the way and let it take us places." Most of the songs from the album had already been performed in venues such as the Fillmore in San Francisco, and the band toured with groups such as Blue Cheer, Mother Earth, and Love. Their music, however, wasn't well received by the hippie audiences. Marquesky recalled, "The hippies were just as pedestrian as people 20 years earlier who were listening to Perry Como and Frank Sinatra. We were perceived as weird because the psychedelic people were pretty parochial in their musical taste, and if you pushed them a little bit, they kind of backed off and looked at you funny." At the time, the group's combination of contemporary rock music with avant-garde ideas and electronic instruments was very unusual and different, and the only other bands from that period who were going for a similar musical approach were groups such as Silver Apples,
Magic fingers through my hair. Magic fingers through my hair.
and the United States of America. Despite their lack of success with the hippies, 50-Foot Hose developed a small but loyal fanbase. The group usually opened their shows with a sonic experiment which consisted of strange electronic noises and rumbling deep bass oscillations. According to Marcheski himself, the low bass tones would vibrate the entire building, and this usually terrified the audience, who felt like they were in the midst of an earthquake. This sonic experiment is the first track on the album.
If not this time,
If Not This Time is the second track on the record, and it's one of the album's highlights. This song features lead singer Nancy Blossom sounding strikingly similar to Grace Slick, and the track sounds akin to the Jefferson Airplane jamming with Stockhausen. Out of all the songs on the album, this is probably the one which sounds closer to the haight-ashbury scene from that period. Several songs from the album are preceded by short electronic tracks featuring audio generator experimentations which serve as codas to the songs they trail.
Things that I do now, they don't concern you now. I'm just trying my mind.
The Things That Concern You was written and sung by guitarist Larry Evan, and it's probably the most conventional track on the album, although the song still features plenty of electronic sounds which give this number a spacey and hypnotic feel. Opus 11 is another 20-second electronic experiment, which gives way to one of the best songs on the album, and a big favorite among fans of the band. Read the Signpost is an aggressive-sounding anti-war song featuring some great fuzz guitar by Dave Blossom, and a brilliant and wild vocal performance by Nancy Blossom. The track almost sounds like a post-punk song from the late 70s. Marcheski commented, "Read the Signpost is an anti-war statement. The song is sung by Nancy Blossom with a kind of punk rock ferocity not dissimilar to Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, totally unlike any other singer at the time." Over the years, some critics have claimed that the riff from the song Space Trucking by Deep Purple was directly lifted from this track. A third electronic intro gives way to a song called Rose, which reflects Dave and Nancy Blossom's interest in jazz.
set in plastic for all to see, but not so drastic as it should be.
This number, with its exotica and jazzy influences, seems to act as the proverbial calm before the storm. The storm starts with Fantasy, the song that opens the B-side of the album. Fantasy is a 10-minute track featuring multiple parts and a structure which is complete musical anarchy. The song starts off with a strange and obsessive riff accompanied by chirping electronic sounds. After 2 hypnotic minutes, the song abruptly morphs into a psychedelic guitar segment which is reminiscent of the sort of guitar jamming that came to define many San Francisco bands from that period. However, after a while, the song mellows out, and Nancy Blossom returns with some mysterious verses about the struggle between fantasy and reality.
Please stay with me. Please stay even though you know my reality.
After that, the hypnotic and obsessive riff found at the beginning of the track returns, and the music grows increasingly more chaotic until the track turns into total musical insanity. The following song is a cover of God Bless the Child by Billie Holiday.
God bless the child who's got his own. Got his own.
Once again, this cover reflects Dave and Nancy Blossom's interest in jazz. With the exception of the electronic sounds that grace the track, their version of the song is quite faithful to the original, and yet again, the jazzy and soothing sound of the song is used as the calm before the storm. The last song on the album is by far their most unusual sonic experiment.
Cauldron of sorrow, conscience seething.
The song, with its freaky segments and avant-garde weirdness, is the most bizarre track on the record. The album was released in early 1968, and of course, their small loyal following wasn't enough to turn the album into a success. According to Marquesky himself, the label pressed 5,000 copies of the album, and it sold next to nothing. Limelight Records soon lost interest in the band when they realized that the album definitely wouldn't become the label's answer to Surrealistic Pillow. The record got a fair amount of airplay in underground stations from California, and the band toured to promote the LP, but the lack of record sales and the lack of interest by their record label was one of the main reasons why the group decided to split in 1969. Earlier that year, the group was offered to go into the cast of the musical Hair. With the exception of Marquesky, the whole band accepted the offer. Lead singer Nancy Blossom became the lead in the San Francisco production of the musical, and she later sang in Godspell. Cork Marquesky forfeited his musical career, but he went on to become a world-renowned sculptor. A couple of decades later, in the late 80s and early 90s, the record was rediscovered by enthusiasts of 60s psychedelia, and the album became a cult classic among fans of the genre. Several groups such as Throbbing Gristle or Chrome also cited the album as a huge influence, and this also helped spark interest in the record. This renewed interest in the group prompted Marquesky to re-release the album in the 90s. In 1996, he also reformed the group, although he was the only remaining member from the original lineup. Cauldron is one of the most unique albums of its era, and it's a pity that such a groundbreaking record still remains unknown to many music fans all over the world. In a review from 1968, music critic Ralph J. Gleason wrote that he didn't know if the group was immature or premature. Considering how ahead of their time their music sounds, it's safe to say that 50 Foot Hose were definitely premature.